Alright, so let's talk about fishing lines. So you have three type of fishing lines available today in most store. The first one, the most widely known and mostly available, most of us started using the monofilament. The monofilament is the cheapest of all the fishing line that are offered today. And if you're on a budget and you don't want to spend a lot of money, then you can skip to the next chapter. Go monofilament. You can't go wrong with it. It's still a great product to use. But I think we've made some progress and we have new alternatives today that are of course pricier but with great benefit as well. So that being said, monofilament, yes, you will catch fish. I caught plenty of fish with monofilament, and I've only swapped recently, in the latest year. So, as I was saying, it's the cheapest, but it's also the thickest in terms of strength to size ratio. Okay, this means that you will have less line on your reel, and it's also going to affect your casting capability. So among all the line that among the three, this is the one that you will have less distance. To me, distance means a lot because it's also accessibility, right? Usually the fish are not coming to us, we're getting to the fish, and if you cannot cast where the fishes are, you might not catch fish that day. So having the capability of casting further will increase your chance of getting fish. So it will resist to abrasions. It has a lot of stretch, so if you're fighting a big fish, that line will be more forgiving. It will stretch, and you're less likely to lose a fish using monofilament. Remember that the size, the diameter of that line makes it heavier, makes it thicker. When you're casting, that bait or that lure that you added at the end of the line is pulling out the line out of your reel. But the heavier it is, it's going to slow down your bait, right? And it's not gonna go as far as it could have been if you were using a smaller, lighter line. All right. The second line we can discuss is the fluorocarbon. Now, the fluorocarbon is, I believe, the most expensive of all, and I use fluorocarbon specifically for a leader, and I'm going to explain what's a leader is. Some people use fluorocarbon all the way, their entire setup is fluorocarbon. It's fine. I prefer my main line is actually braid. So fluorocarbon, the most expensive, it will sink, and it does resist abrasions. The main thing here with fluorocarbon is the fact that it's almost invisible underwater, so the fish will not detect the line, so they won't be puzzled by the fact that there is something moving in front of them, and they will only see and focus on your bait. In terms of casting distance, it's average. Yes, it is thinner than monofilament, so you will have clearly better casting distance using fluorocarbon, and you will also have more line of fluorocarbon on your reel, being smaller diameter. To me, the king of all the lines is the braid, but I don't use braid 100%. I use all three lines at the same time, and I explain how. But braided line, how it goes, is also expensive, not as fluorocarbon, but it's clearly more expensive than the mono, and that's line float. So if you're fishing top water lure, this is great. It has zero stretch, and this is great because you will feel every little bite, or as soon as something happens to your lure, and you will also feel the action of your lure when you're using a crankbait or something. That vibration comes through the line very, very, very quickly. So as soon as something's off, like a fish is hitting it, you'll know it. And as you're setting the hook, because there's zero stretch, it makes hook setting faster and easier with the braided line. As the monofilament, that stretch will make your hook setting not as sharp and clean that if you were using braid. Downside is it's not very resistant to abrasions, and it's also very, very visible underwater. It's opaque. It's not a translucent or transparent type of line. Oh yeah, another con of the braided is it has a tendency to slip on your reel. So if usually at the base of your reel you have like a rubber nut, but if you're pulling the line really, really hard, let's say you're landing a big fish, there's a possibility that the entire spool of line will just twist, and even if you're trying to reel in it, the line will just slip around the reel, and then you won't be able to land that fish. So how do I use all 3 lines to make sure that my system is like, foolproof? I will start the spooling using some monofilament, and the reason being is the monofilament will grip on the spool itself. Therefore, there's no slippage. If I'm landing a huge fish and that it's pulling really, really hard, I know that the line is going to be very, very secure on the reel. That being said, you need to make sure that the pound test that you're using are equivalent, meaning you don't want an 8-pound as backing and then use a 20-pound. That's not good, because if you reach the backing, it means your line now is 8-pound, and if you're reaching your backing, I can clearly tell you that 8-pound is not going to be sufficient. So you want something stronger. So you want 30 or 40-pound test as backing. Then you use a 30 or 20-pound test as braided line for the main that you attach to your reel. And so this is going to be the main bulk of your line. Then at the end you might want a 6 or 9 feet of a leader, and this is where I will use fluorocarbon. And the fluorocarbon being invisible, it makes the perfect line to present a lure or a bait to the fish, because the fish will only see the what's in front of him, the lure, and he will not see the big line that is attached to it. So this is how I do my setup. And then again, I will use a line that is a little bit not as strong as a 20-pound test trillion. So for example, if I were using a 20-pound test braided line, then I will use maybe a 15-pound test as a leader. Okay, so you go from big to small. Right. So something I want to mention here quickly is I want to talk about the pound test rating of fishing lines. And it doesn't mean that you cannot catch a fish that is heavier than 8 pounds. That's not how it works. It means that you cannot lift an object that is more than 8 pounds. And knowing this, know that not all our lines are equal. So some will, an 8-pound test will be able to maybe lift 9 or 10 pounds. Or in some other brands, your maximum is probably going to be 6 pounds. So take this with a grain of salt. Give and take. What it means though, it's how you're going to handle the fish that you caught. So for example, if you hooked a 20-pound fish on an 8-pound test line, you're going to adapt a little bit how you're fighting that fish, where you won't be that super aggressive. You're going to give him a little bit more line. You want to tire him more than actually fight him, with tooth and nails. So you want to bring him slowly to you, give it constant pressure, and bring the fish to you. When you have your fishing line, also know that the weakest link is not going to be the line itself, but it's going to be the nut. And usually also nuts come with their rating, so some nuts have 90% strength rate, or some other 95 or 60, depending on the type of nut that you're using. They will have difference. And also know that braid line or monofilament or fluorocarbon have some level of variance in them, which makes some nuts are not as strong. For example, a nut that is going to be very strong on braid might not be as strong on fluorocarbon, for example. And fluorocarbon, one of the I don't remember if I mentioned it, but one of the of fluorocarbon is like nuts tend to slip a little bit more than mono or braided line. And one quick way to test your nuts is you can, when you're learning how to tie your nuts with your fishing line, I encourage you to lift some of the objects you have around you and that you actually know how much they weigh. So if you have training weight at home, for example, you could lift some weights to see how strong are the combination of the nut that you have and the line. And for example, here I made a test with my braid. So this braided line is braided 30, and I wasn't able to lift that 25-pound weight with this line. So is it the line? Is it my nut? I don't know. I need to make some tests to make sure, what would be the best combination for this. All right.